We are going to study portions of the book of Job. This is a tough book, but it is the one book in the Bible that God speaks so clearly to an individual. I mean, he does it in other books, but not quite like this. The book of Job is a theodicy, to be sure. So let's delve into the book of Job. Let's read its introduction. The book of Job is one of the few books in the Hebrew Scriptures that does not derive its title from the first word in the text. The name is a transliteration of the Hebrew word Eoab, which means the hated or persecuted one. Although there is no mention of the author's name within the book, most scholars accept Talmudic tradition that Moses is the author of the book. There are others who propose that Solomon was the author. They suggest that Solomon's vast knowledge of foreign countries and cultures would have provided him with the information to write the book of Job. This fails to prove that only Solomon could have written the book. For would not Moses, having received the highest training in Egypt, have learned of numerous foreign nations as well? However, the main problem with the Solomonic view of authorship is that the time span that separated the patriarchal period and Solomon's lifetime. On the other hand, Mosaic authorship is supported by the use of many words and phrases found in the book of Job that are also used in the Pentateuch. Another argument in favor of this view is that the land of Uz was adjacent to Midian, where Moses spent 40 years prior to his return to Egypt. It seems entirely possible that he could have heard the story of Job there and been inspired by God to correctly relate the events and conversations that occurred. It is generally accepted that he dwelled in Midian between the years of 1485 and 1445 BC. Furthermore, there is good reason to believe that the events took place during the patriarchal period. No reference is made to the events of the Exodus, and the patriarchal name for God, the Almighty, is used approximately 30 times in the book. The fact that Job acted as the priest for his family implies that the Mosaic law had not yet been given. The length of Job's life is comparable to those living during the time of the patriarchs. The book of Job is the first of the so-called poetical books of the Bible. The truth is, however, that poetry is found throughout the whole Old Testament. For example, it is used in blessings and curses in Genesis, in certain historical accounts, and in dirges. The poetry of the Old Testament is very different from the modern poetry. It involves not the rhyming of sounds, but the rhyming of thoughts or ideas. The characteristic of Hebrew poetry is now called parallelism. For the most part, parallelism may be either antithetical, where the thoughts are opposite to one another, Proverbs 10:12, or synonymous, where the thoughts are the same as or similar to the other, Psalm 24:1. Since rhymes of sound are difficult, if not impossible, to carry out in translation, the appreciation of English poetry is limited to those who know the language. On the other hand, the beauty of the thought rhythm of Hebrew poetry may be carried over into any language. The book of Job is a beautiful example of Hebrew poetry, which in fact, not the whole book is poetic in form. The prologue and the epilogue are written in prose. The drama of Job's suffering, the majestic style, and the nature of the discussions have helped to make Job universally accepted as a literary masterpiece. The purpose of the book is to show the unfathomable wisdom of God's providence and the benevolence of God even in the trials brought upon his children. It also explains why God allows righteous people to suffer, to expose their frailty and sinfulness, to strengthen their faith, and to purify them. The spiritual perspective of the account and the fact that God exercise total control over Satan, promotes complete trust in God. Throughout the book, Job's friends relentlessly accused him of committing some great sin. Although he questioned God's actions in the midst of these onslaughts, it should be assumed that his queries were motivated by a resentful self. It should not be assumed that his queries were motivated by a resentful, self-seeking attitude. On the contrary, they confirm his determination to hold on to his faith in God, despite the circumstances that providence had brought upon him. So that is the introduction. I would add, it's much more than a literary masterpiece. It is a love letter from Job to God, from God to Job, from God to all people. It's a love letter. It's replete with promises and providence. It's replete with the frailty of life, the testing of Satan, the perseverance of real Christianity. It's lots of things. It is certainly not just literary prose. It is certainly not just poems. It is certainly not a questionable theodicy. This happened, and when you read it, the sovereignty of God will make you weep. When he speaks to Job with such majesty and sovereignty and omnipotence, it will bring you to your knees. You will fall in love with the God of this creation. You will fall in love with the God of your soul. You will fall in love with the Creator. You will fall in love with Job. This man does not waver. He is the quintessential example of a faithful servant of God. This concludes the introduction. We will take up chapter 1 tomorrow.